Well, the medical director for Baylor, of course, under the umbrella of Baylor Scott and White, Dr. Laura Irvin, joining us this morning to talk a little bit about, three is a trend. And when I say three, I'm talking about three Achilles tears in the NBA postseason. We had Dame Lillard went down, then you had Jayson Tatum, and then Tyrese Haliburton. For folks like you, you're on the front line of this stuff, working with Baylor Athletics all the time. For folks like myself and millions of fans everywhere, we're wondering, why is this happening? Is there a reason it's happening now to these elite athletes as compared to 10 years ago? Is it a concern? I guess we'll start with that, though. Is there a reason it's happening more now?
Sure. I think that there's a lot of different factors with this that can make it hard to answer that concretely. And I know a lot of people will be looking at this postseason once everything's done. When it comes to Achilles tears, there's a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. At the NBA level, these are elite athletes. They're performing high intensity activity a heck of a lot more than me and you are. So not only is the volume of their activity higher, their intensity is higher. Some of these professional athletes are also playing in different leagues in the off season. And then you have to look at their age, and you also have to look at their shoe wear as well.
When you say shoe wear, explain that a little bit. Like, is that like I need a new shoe every night, or is that maybe I should wear the same shoe so it's adjusting a little bit and getting broken in?
I think it's very important. Of course, the volume and miles that your shoe has is important, but it's also the type of shoe that you have. And, just like with football, there's different types of helmets that can kind of come into popularity. I think there's the same with shoe wear. Are you wearing high tops? Are they shorter in basketball? That could be playing a factor that people will be probably looking into.
Oh, that's all right. So I think you're leaving breadcrumbs now, because that's a really interesting point. When I grew up, right back in the day, when I was an athlete, and I was a football player, but I played a lot of basketball. High tops were like a prerequisite. We have been getting away from high top shoes. Could that be contributing in part, maybe, to some of these?
Sure. I don't think it's the entire reason by any means that it's happening, but it could be a small factor that is playing a role.
Okay, so we talk about that. What about load management in the NBA? That's a big thing, right? Like Kevin Durant just got traded to the Rockets, and I was just looking at his season. He played 62 games, and at 37 years of age, that's actually really reasonable. I think that's a lot. 82 games is a ton, right? Do you think that some of the mileage, like even here's what I wanted to ask you. I'm sorry. With players playing less, but these injuries are happening more than they used to. Like let's say Julius Irving was playing 82 games when Dr. J with the Sixers. He wasn't getting these injuries weren't happening as often, but now they are. What do you attribute that to if guys are playing less than they were before?
I'm a big advocate for load management, so I think it's very important. I think that sometimes these injuries, there can be a connection, and sometimes there's not. Sometimes you can make a powerful, sudden movement, and you can rupture your Achilles, and you can do everything perfect from load management to recovery to shoe wear to warm ups to calf exercises. And it can unfortunately still happen, just like we can sometimes see with ACL injuries as well. So I'm not sure if there's a correlation necessarily. I think if anything, the load management is probably keeping these athletes more healthy.
So do you think is it the speed of the game improving? I always say, like, you work with football players, like, when when Baylor was playing in the Southwest Conference, like those guys were sick athletes, but that would be more like a collision on, Franklin Avenue, right? Two cars going like, 25 miles per hour. Now it's like in the Big 12 on a Saturday, you got like an 18-wheeler and a Maserati on I-35. Does the speed and the strength and the weight of these guys, does that contribute to it at all?
Of course. So anytime you have these athletes jumping, pivoting, making big, impactful movements, it can definitely correlate to there being injury. That's why things like making sure you are strengthening your calves, you're doing the flexibility, because your calf is what your Achilles is attached to. And that's what makes it so important to do your warm ups, do your recoveries that everybody preaches.
When you see this happen to players now, obviously it's a different world rehabilitation wise. You know this from working at Baylor Scott and White and working with Baylor. What have the strides been as far as these guys are able to come back, and girls, young women are able to come back faster than ever? Do you see someone get hurt now, rupturing an Achilles, and as a doctor feel better about their chances to make a 100% recovery?
Of course, every year the technology is better and we learn more and more. And so the recovery is better. I also think it's very much sports specific as well. Um, you know, golfer tearing their Achilles and returning versus a basketball player versus a gymnast are all very different things. The speed of their recovery, the type of physical therapy they're doing is helpful. And their time of recovery, which is always a good question, really can depend on their season. Someone may take a little bit longer to return if it doesn't impact them getting back to season versus, if they need to cut a few weeks off, if they're able to healthy and safely, because season's around the corner.
How about like Kevin Durant had this issue in 2019, and we saw it with Haliburton just a few nights ago, where you have a soreness that you're kind of playing through because the stakes are so high. Does that, how vulnerable, I guess I should say, because I would imagine it does make you vulnerable to having a more severe injury, but how vulnerable does that make you if you're playing through a strained calf because you're in game 7 of the NBA finals and maybe you've taken some drugs or whatever, like, given to you by a doctor for your leg. Does that contribute at all? Like the vulnerability that you open yourself up to? How much, I guess?
I think that's where it's really important to have conversations involving the athlete, their coach, the physician, their athletic trainer, to discuss the risks and the benefits involved. A game 7 with a calf strain may look different than a preseason game, but knowing that you're discussing those risks. Unfortunately, none of us have a crystal ball to know exactly what could happen, but making sure that there is informed consent by that athlete, knowing that, this could happen, this might happen, is always very important when having these discussions with athletes, especially during a high stakes game.
Is there a particular sport that is maybe more at risk? Working with all the sports that you work with under the umbrella with Baylor and with Baylor Scott and White, is there a particular sport that is more at risk?
You do typically see these in basketball players. We have a unique sport at Baylor University called acrobatics and tumbling, which is an emerging sport.
All they do is win championships over there.
That is all they do. It's a good mix of gymnastics with some acrobatics and some cheerleading involved as well, would be my layman's terms way of describing it. And it's much more than all of that, but because of the high intensity tumbling that they do, we see quite a few with that sport as well.
So how about the age of the player? Because Tyrese Haliburton's pretty young. It's not like it's Aaron Rodgers, right? A few years ago, making his way into his 40s with the Jets. How much does age play a role?
I think age plays a huge role. The younger you are, the faster you're going to heal, but it's also your health as well. So you want to make sure you're healthy, you're doing all the right things to your body, nutrition wise, sleep wise, hydration wise, to set yourself up for the best recovery possible.
Is this, this all this stuff, talking about this stuff kind of stinks, but does this open up a door for you to have more of a voice, or through some of the other folks on the athletic support staff working in sports medicine, to say, hey, here are things that you can do to prevent this? And if so, what are the things that young athletes can do?
Sure. Just like you said, when things come in threes and it starts to become a buzz, there's a lot more questions that are asked, which gives us avenues to provide education as much as possible. When things like this happen on a very high stakes level that a lot of people see, people pay more attention and ask a lot more questions. I love providing education as much as I can. I think one of the biggest things for people to know is recovery and listening to your body. If something doesn't feel right, that's something to, whether it's an athletic trainer or a physician, let them know. Stretching is important. Tight calves mean tight Achilles, which is important with this because the body's connected. It's also your conditioning. Are you in good physical fitness or poor physical fitness? And are you jumping back into a sport that you haven't been in? It's gradually getting back into sports, making sure you have the right footwear for whatever sport that you're a part of. And there's also some medications that can contribute to tendon health, and making sure that you're avoiding certain activities if you have to be on certain medications for acute illness reasons that can cause tendon rupture as well.
Any of those? What would be some of those medicines?
So there's certain antibiotics. They're
Okay.
very rare antibiotics, and most physicians, especially team physicians, know which ones to avoid in their athletes at all costs. And if for whatever reason it's needed for their acute health and safety, it's making sure that there's time taken off from that sport and load management, getting back into things.
Dr. Irvin, how about like the painkillers, like shots they would give players to get through a game without, feeling pain? That's effective, but at the same time, you don't hear your body like screaming, right? Like you normally would. Are you a proponent, or do you kind of approach that stuff with caution?
I like to do it case by case in every sense of the matter. There's injections that can help. There are some, oral medications that you take by mouth that can help. There's also risks to those and side effects as well. So it's taking that case by case, making sure it's not becoming a pattern. Also, important things to realize, like especially with your Achilles tendon, you don't inject steroid into an Achilles tendon because it can cause rupture itself as well. So there's a lot of things we have to do to keep the integrity of that tendon. So I think it's very much a balance. And again, risks and benefits of talking through with your athletes specifically before making that decision.
One more question. This has been so enlightening, by the way. I really appreciate you taking the time to educate us on this. From a psychological perspective, what is it like when you sit in front of a young athlete who all they want to do? This happened to me. I was an athlete. I had a heart problem. I was on scholarship. I actually, they kept me on scholarship, but I could never play because I had cardiomyopathy. But there were some really hard conversations there. What is it like for you when you have to be a part of one of those conversations and say, "Hey, you cannot play with this"? Like how that's a tough. I mean, I would imagine there's a lot of things about your job that's hard, but I would guess that's probably one of the hardest. What's that like?
Oh, of course. I mean, going into sports medicine, the goal is you want to get athletes back on the field as quickly and safely as possible. But we also have to remember they're a person first, and their safety and livelihood come before their athletics. At Baylor University, we try to take a multidisciplinary approach to this, meaning it's not just me in the room. There's parents involved, there's coaches involved. We have an amazing mental health department that walks athletes through this as well too. And so we really do this as a team effort. We try to do everything possible to get an athlete cleared. And if we absolutely can't for whatever reason, then we still support them through that process, and trying to help steer that athlete to know that their life doesn't have to be defined by sport, and to help them find value in something else.
What sport did you play? What was your best sport?
Oh, I was a runner. I didn't play a lot of sports, so I don't term myself an athlete.
Cross country, track and field, or just a runner like you love running?
I did cross country, but my husband jokes that that's not a coordination sport, so it doesn't count.
Hey, endurance is something else. So much respect. All right, Dr. Irvin, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to the folks at Baylor Scott and White for making this possible. I think now is a time where, regardless of whether this is a finite moment where everybody's talking about that, it's still an opportunity for us to educate people on something that is very important. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.